All right, today, ladies and gentlemen, you're going to learn about NAFTA, which, as you'll see in the next slide, was a free trade agreement between the countries of the United States, Canada, and Mexico. All right, so we just finished up our physical and environmental features unit. We call that the USA and Canada assessment number 1. You all should have presented on your region of the United States and Canada, or United States or Canada, and how the physical and environmental features impact where and how people live. Okay, so what is NAFTA? NAFTA is the North American Free Trade Agreement. North American Free Trade Agreement. It went into effect on January 1st, 1994, so it's been around for 25 years. North American Free Trade Agreement, January 1st, 1994. Now, I would encourage Mr. Detmer just to pause the slides here so you guys can make sure you write these down, because I'm just going to go right into the next slide here to keep the time of the video down. All right, so go ahead and pause after each slide to make sure every kid gets the information that they need. Okay, so vocabulary here. Here are 4 main vocabulary words that I want you to understand for this unit. NAFTA, again, it's a free trade deal between Canada, United States, and Mexico. Free trade means that there's no taxes or tariffs between goods that are traded between countries. So a country in Mexico, if they have a product that people want in the United States, they can't put a tax or tariff on it. It gets traded freely. There's no added taxes that gets put on goods traded between those 3 countries. Next is GDP. That stands for gross domestic product. That is the amount of stuff made per year in a country. Now, that's a very middle school basic definition, but that's all you'll need to know for 8th grade social studies, is understand that it's just the amount of stuff made in a year by a country. It's a way of measuring a country's economy. Next is GDP per capita. That is gross domestic product per person. So the one above that, it was the amount of stuff per year. This one, you see that per capita at the end, is the amount of stuff made per year per person. Okay, so a country like the United States that has over like 330, 350 million people, they're going to produce a lot more than a small country in Europe who maybe only has 10 million people. But when you add in the per capita, it allows you to better balance per person. It's like the average. How much stuff are they making per year per person in that country? And so both GDP and GDP per capita can be used when measuring a country's economy. And a third statistic that we use to measure a country's economy is unemployment rate. Unemployment rate is the percentage of people in the workforce that don't have a job. And this is important to understand what the workforce means. Okay, this does not include full-time students. If you're a 21-year-old full-time student that's going to St. Cloud State, okay, and you don't have a job, you're going to school, you're not counting against the unemployment rate. You as 13, 14-year-old 8th graders don't count against the unemployment rate because your job is going to school. Okay, so you're not considered unemployed. The person who maybe the one spouse works a full-time job, makes a nice wage, makes a nice amount of money, and so the other spouse stays home or doesn't work. They're not looking for work. They're not applying for jobs. They're not getting unemployment benefits. They also would not count in the unemployment rate. So unemployment rate is the percentage of people in the workforce that don't have a job. That means people who are actively seeking employment or actively seeking a job that just don't have a job. Okay, so three things here. What was the purpose of NAFTA? What was the purpose of the North American Free Trade Agreement? Number one, it intended to increase trade between the USA, Canada, and Mexico, and it has. It increased trade between those 3 countries. Okay, there's resources in Canada that they don't have in Mexico. There's resources in the United States that they don't have in Canada. There's resources in Mexico that they don't have in the United States. And so by increasing trade between the 3 countries, the idea was, well, we can get these resources that we don't have in our country and bring them in for cheap. 2 easy examples. There's a lot of lumber in Canada. And so that can be a business in the United States can trade for lumber that's in Canada. For Mexico, they have a lot of fruits, and we'll watch a video here in a few minutes about avocados. Okay, there's a lot of avocados and oranges and strawberries, a lot of fruit and vegetables that we get from Mexico, and so the prices stay down on those goods. The prices stay cheaper, as we'll get into the next one, because there's not taxes put on by the countries. So number two, cheaper goods, which lead to economic growth. If you're paying $2 for an avocado, for example, in Mexico, versus $4, you now have more money to spend on other things. Okay, shoes that can be produced in that might be. I got an update here. Okay. Sorry. Back to our presentation. Shoes that might be made or produced in Mexico, they can be made cheaper, and we'll watch some videos on this here in a minute, which saves you, the consumer, right? If products are being produced cheaper, it's going to save the consumer. And then third, the availability of more and different resources. Like I mentioned, each country has their own unique resources that aren't seen in the other two countries, or maybe they're not as common. So this allows for people and businesses from USA, Canada, and Mexico to have the availability of different resources for production, but also consumers have cheaper and more available goods. What were some of the consequences? Two big ones here. Production jobs left the United States and went to Mexico. In our economics unit, we talked about regulations. One regulation that the United States has is a minimum wage. And so the minimum wage can the minimum wage, for example, in the United States is $7.25 an hour. Whereas in Mexico, that isn't the case. And so if you were a company that was making shoes in the United States, you would have to pay your workers $7.25 an hour. But if you're to move your factory to Mexico, you might only have to pay your workers $3 an hour. Now, people would get shoes for cheaper, right? If a company is producing a good like shoes and they only have to pay their workers $3 an hour versus $7.25 an hour here, that's going to keep the total cost of the shoe down. But unfortunately, it's going to cause jobs to be lost to other countries. And so people who maybe lived in a shoe factory or lived in a community with a shoe factory, they would no longer have jobs available for them because they had left to Mexico. And then it also led to an increase in illegal immigration when you had free trade between the three countries. All right, so take a second, look over this cartoon, and on your own answer questions 1 and 2. What is going on in this cartoon, and then what is the main idea? Okay, so I would encourage you just pause the video here because I'm going to go to the next slide, but answer questions 1 and 2 after looking at the cartoon. Okay, recently there's a new agreement reached between the three countries. This was reached on October 1st, 2018, so just over a year ago. Between the United States, Mexico, and Canada. It is called the United States, Mexico, and Canada Agreement. USMCA is abbreviated. It's just considered NAFTA 2.0. It does 4 things here. One, it opens up Canada's dairy market to the U.S. farmers, opens up some of the dairy farming to the U.S. farmers. It increases wages in all 3 countries for workers in car factories. We talked about how jobs were leaving the United States to Mexico and factories. So in the auto industry, in the car industry, it increased what the wages have to be for workers that are working in car factories, regardless of what country they're in. 3, it ensures that more car and truck parts are made in North America instead of getting parts from Asia, from other countries overseas. It ensures that the car and truck parts are made in North America, keep those jobs here. And then it protects Mexico and Canada from tariffs by the United States. So those are the 4 things. I don't expect you to memorize those. That just gives you some information. But big idea, North American Free Trade Agreement or the United States-Mexico-Canada Agreement 2.0, it opens up free trade between the 3 countries. And finally here, I got about 15 seconds left. Watch these 3 videos. This is going to help you understand what NAFTA does and how it impacts the 3 countries involved.